and again in 2017, I kind of hit that rock bottom because of all the things I dealt with. And I was like, I had to start choosing me completely, and I think that's where it stemmed from. It's like, I need to choose me in everything I do. And if I'm not going to advocate for myself, who is? And so it was kind of, it was really a mindset shift, because I was like, I feel like I always used to put others before myself, especially in high school too. And that was also had to do with nonsense then, but really understanding it's like, I don't want to deal with the nonsense anymore. I want to get better. I want to live life to the fullest. I want to enjoy my career. I want to find the love of my life. I want to do all these things. I want to enjoy and wake up every morning with a smile on my face as much as I possibly can.
This podcast is supported by storiedwork.com. Do you ever struggle to get your thoughts written down in a clear and structured way? I often do. And when I'm planning my podcast scripts or articles, I have so many ideas in my head and I struggle to get them organized in writing. With Storied, all I need to do is speak in my thoughts and the tool automatically organizes my ideas. I love it because it provides feedback and prompts me to fill in any gaps to make my message crystal clear. Storied was founded by a dyslexic physicist who needed a new kind of tool to write. What their team discovered was that seeing your thoughts and ideas turn into clearly structured text unlocks potential for almost everyone. If you're having trouble translating your thoughts into clearly written content, such as articles or social posts, try Storied for free. Go to storiedwork.com. Do you often put others before yourself at the expense of your own well-being? I admit I have, and I still do. I want to help others, and saying no and setting boundaries isn't something I'm good at. Hey, Tim here, and thanks for tuning into another episode of the Invisible Condition podcast, where we talk about advocacy and unusually normal things, the conditions, diseases, and illnesses we live with. We will end the stigma of invisible conditions by empowering voices, and today's voice is brought to us by Sydney Elaine Butler. Sydney lives with autism, CPTSD, and fibromyalgia. And when studying employment law while pursuing their human resources degree, they found out firsthand that discrimination is real. So Sydney decided to turn their conditions into a force for advocacy and inclusion. Sydney shares their journey of advocacy, the highs and the lows, and how choosing to prioritize their needs leads to creating change. Whether you're navigating these conditions yourself or looking to supporting someone who is, this conversation is for you. Have a listen. Well, Sydney, it has been a long time coming for you to join the Invisible Condition podcast. We've known each other. We connected years ago, and then I left an organization and launched Invisible Condition. And here we are. I am very excited to have you on for a variety of reasons, but enough about me and me talking. Who are you? Let our audience know a little bit about who you are.
Who am I? That's a huge question, but
let's start there.
No biggie. So yeah, I'm Sydney Elaine Butler. I think one of my biggest identities is that I am a founder of a company called Accessible Creates. Where we provide training and consulting to companies and to better support disabilities in the workplace. And so I studied HR in school, worked in HR, human resources, for a little bit, and really saw that it was not accessible and inclusive to people with disabilities. And I also worked in a recreational environment when I was in school for human resources, and realized how my supervisors and my coworkers treated me as I was increasingly becoming more disabled, and how they treated my coworkers and my friends that also had disabilities in the workplace. And so I decided to start my company to tackle these issues and advocate for myself and advocate for others like me. And so I was diagnosed with autism at a young age. And then as a teenager, I suffered from depression. And I think that led to also getting a CPTSD diagnosis. And that turned into also getting diagnosed with fibromyalgia.
Wow. So much right in there, getting to know you in a minute and a half. First off, well, thank you for trusting us with this story and the story of who you are and even what led you to start your business, because I've connected with so many people over the last few months, and some, including me for many years, would have just kind of started to hide or hide their disability, not say, you know what, there's some discrimination going on. I don't like this. So I'm just going to start a company and tackle this. Like, that takes a strong and brave person. So good on you for that.
Thank you.
And you shared with us that you're diagnosed with a few conditions, autism, CPTSD, and fibromyalgia. Can you share a little bit about the definition of your conditions?
Yeah, I feel like there's so many definitions, but and it's how you and sometimes very different from how you experience them. But basically, with autism, kind of, I consider it like different processing. Sometimes it takes me longer to process information. I see the world kind of differently, um, and sometimes I do things differently. I started my own business to tackle this issue, and someone's like, that like, oh, that's an interesting way to come about that problem. And just seeing the world a little differently, and kind of also pattern recognition is a huge thing with being autistic. I'm like, I love patterns, and I see a pattern, and I love that. And so that's that condition. And I think with CPTSD, which is complex post traumatic stress disorder, a lot of people just know it as PTSD. But PTSD is usually one incident that was traumatic, and that after not getting that care leads to that PTSD. Complex is little traumas, even though all trauma is big. Having little traumas or having repeated trauma over a series of years, and how that impacts how you show up. And also with traditional PTSD, there's flashbacks. People see and they get triggered, they have that reaction and they see it, but then with CPTSD, it's more emotional. So when I feel the emotions of how I felt during that trauma, it can cause me to spiral. And then fibromyalgia, I like leg conditions, having flare up in your legs, having difficulty walking, and also really bad brain fog.
Okay. Wow. I think I've said wow like 3 times already. So you live with multiple
Mhm,
conditions. How how is your day to day? I'm
mhm.
curious. Do you have extreme highs, extreme lows, and how do you navigate
I really
your
do
day to
have
day?
extreme highs and lows. I feel like I used to have more extreme highs and lows before understanding what my body and how my mind was actually interacting and dealing with these things. And now that I know what I'm dealing with, and as a business owner, it kind of makes for more flexibility. So, like, just to be honest with you, I was so tired before this podcast. I was like, I'm going to have a quick 15-minute nap because, I had a nightmare last night, and that impacted my quality of my sleep, which is a direct result of my CPTSD. And so I woke up feeling extra sleepy. It's also snowing here, so that doesn't help. The weather can impact any of my conditions. And so understanding that sometimes I have to be a little bit patient with myself. But I have to-do lists. I have to-do lists for my work stuff, for to-do lists for volunteering. I also now even have a to-do list for self-care. So like I did my workout this morning and my stretching, and have that all on my to-do list, because otherwise I would forget what I have to do, for work, and also to take care of myself, to be able to do the work I'm doing and to continue, changing the way of work that I want to.
I'm a huge fan of naps. I love the 15-minute nap. I feel so refreshed. I have a friend who just can't nap, be so tired and not nap, and I feel so bad for them.
Apparently, the optimal
Just
nap
that
is
nap.
26 minutes.
26 minutes. Okay. I may try that today because like you, I'm feeling a little
Mhm,
tired, but listen, I'd like to back up
mhm,
just a bit because I know how this affects your day to day. And I would love to, as much
mhm,
details, little details you want to share just about the diagnosis story. I know you'd mentioned autism at a
mhm,
young age and the other conditions came later, a little
mhm.
bit later on. But how was it at a young age being diagnosed with autism?
Yeah, I think I didn't really understand what it meant, even though, I got that diagnosis, because I also had to go to speech therapy because I couldn't say my R's properly. I would speak too fast, sometimes still do. Um, but understanding that when I would get supports in the classroom, and again to go to that speech therapy, I would thrive. And then when I wouldn't have those supports, I'd be like, there's something different here, or I would feel different. And it was kind of my normal. I didn't recognize that it was different, even though I could see from my classmates in a school setting. They're like, hey, they're not going to speech therapy. They're not getting, you know, they don't have to have. I had a pencil and I had the grippy thing because of my mobility at my hand, And they're like, oh, that's cool that you have that tool. And I was like, oh yeah, I guess it is. I didn't realize at the time it was an accommodation to help me. And so it was kind of my normal, but also seeing that it was different from my classmates was an interesting experience. And I didn't really understand what it meant too, because growing up as a girl that's autistic instead of a boy, and so I think that's also a very different lived experience.
Mm. Yeah, even I like how you said, even just how you grip your pencil as you look back now, is seeing that that was an
Hmm.
accommodation. And I'm sure that that is also now informing the work that you're
Hmm.
doing as you go into workplaces and talk about disability inclusion and accommodation and accessibility.
Yeah, I think there's so many great advocates out there that are advocating, but now being diagnosed as adults. And now, in retrospect, they're understanding this is what I did as a kid. This is it's clicking now for them. And I was like, I knew I had accommodations when I was a kid. I just didn't know truly what it meant. But also, I know my experience of being different.
Yeah, the language that you've used a few times that I've picked up on is my normal.
Hmm.
And that directly plays into, and not even plays into, but uh, lends itself to the purpose and the mission of Invisible Condition.
Hmm.
My normal is different than your normal. And so, how do we create a society that, and
Hmm.
workplaces, school systems that accept my version of normal? Because my version looks different than your
Hmm.
version. But yet, I'm normal. I think I'm normal. Maybe not normal. Maybe I don't like to be classified as normal, but this is my normal.
Yeah, I think normal is very subjective, but I think as a society we try to make it objective almost. It's like there's this picture of what normal is supposed to look like. But again, we all have different normals and different levels of who we are and what in our lived reality of what makes our everyday life what it is. And so really understanding that I think when society and organizations and school settings realize that there's no right way to be normal, and that if you really you foster the person where they're at and help them grow and meet them where they're at, then real change can happen.
Then Invisible Condition and your business would just like, okay, I guess we're done, because we've created these
Hmm.
settings where people can show up as my normal or your
Well,
normal. I love
I
that.
always joke. I'm like, my job is to put myself out of business. Because even though it's
Yeah.
like I love what I do, and it's like, but I'm hoping for a future where I don't have to fight so hard for what is normal and for my rights and other people's rights.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about that. You are a fierce advocate, if I'm allowed to use that word, fierce, and I think you are. You're all over LinkedIn and social media. You're doing amazing work. And let's talk about that, because when you were in
Hmm.
school, you saw, and then in the workplace, and you saw right away that there's a need
Hmm.
here. I'm curious if you can talk to us a little bit about that need again, as much or as little detail as you can, and then how did that you then turn that into a catalyst to starting a
Hmm.
business, an advocacy business?
Yeah, I think so. Seeing how I remember, I was in employment law class in human resources in during school. I was in business administration, human resources, and I had to take a lot of law classes because legislation. I'm actually a legislation nerd. Um, but a lot of my classmates, we had a case specifically around accommodation in the workplace, and my classmates were like, wait, back up. As we were going through the case study, people with disabilities actually went into the workforce. Why would they want to do that? They get paid by the government. They can just stay home. Or they don't have enough skills for that. I'm just like, I'm sitting right here, and that was kind of like my light bulb far under my butt moment. I mean, like, okay, like I knew something was wrong before that, but I was like, okay, if these are the people that are about to enter human resources, about to go into the business world and recruit people and want to retain people, and they're not thinking about how they retain all different kinds of people and it was just like, okay, I need to do this is going to be my niche within human resources because there's clearly a need for it, and I need to advocate for myself, and I need to advocate for others like me. And knowing, I'm like, if people they're about to into the workforce feel like this, I know other people in the workforce already feel like this, whereas people with disabilities that have that discrimination against us. So I was like, I need to do something.
I also, maybe not so much the legislation. Maybe you and I will talk about that offline because I have an idea around
Mm-hmm.
that. But I love reading studies and studies from big name consulting
Mm-hmm.
companies around disability inclusion, whether it's Accenture or here in
Mm-hmm.
Canada, there's a few other organizations, national organizations. And every study says that people with a disability, apparent or
Mm-hmm.
not apparent, is the most underutilized and untapped workforce
Mm-hmm.
there is. So if you're listening to this and maybe you're an individual looking to enter the workforce, there's opportunity for you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you're in HR and you're listening to this, and maybe you need to pause and relook at your disability inclusion
Mm-hmm.
statement. And if you don't have one, talk to myself, talk to Sydney. There's others
Mm-hmm.
as well, because we can support you on that, because it's so important. If we want to create places of feeling included, we have to include
Mm-hmm.
everyone.
Yeah, it's so interesting, and then it's especially because disability covers so many different different backgrounds. It's matter, if you're LGBTQ2+ plus, if you're black, if you're Asian, it doesn't matter. It can happen to anyone at any time, and so it's very frustrating sometimes that people we're still an underutilized labor market and don't understand that. Well, people are like, oh well, again, go back to the norm. It's like, oh well, I have to do more. I have to do accommodations. I have to do a little bit more work, and but it's like in the long run, it's going to help your company. It's going to help that increase inclusion. And if you really want that inclusion, we have to be at the table.
I want to go back again to you have a few other
Yes.
diagnoses as well, and CPTSD and
Mm-hmm.
fibromyalgia. Would you be able to share a little bit about the diagnosis journey for those? And again, in as much as little detail as you're able to.
Yeah, it was so 2017 when I was still in my, because I have my degree and also my diploma from the same institution at Sheridan College, because I was so thankful that they did a degree completion program. And so in 2017 was a very trying year for me. The following year in 2018, I was like, hey, no, you have CPTSD. And I was like, what do you mean? And it was very complicated. And then I was still working, helping kids, teens, and adults with disabilities. And I was getting my legs. I was like, I would have trouble walking sometimes. Or my legs would be very stiff. And I was just like, my body felt like it was failing me. And I didn't understand what was happening. And I would bring it to the doctors. Oh, you're just fine. You're just, everyone has bad leg days, or, you're just pushing yourself too much. Maybe just take more rest days. Because I was working a lot of hours too at work, and it was very, very physically demanding. But I was like, no, this something doesn't feel right. And actually, there's a link between PTSD or CPTSD with fibromyalgia and how the trauma is stored in the body. And so that there was a correlation there. And I was also like, I'm like, because it started in my right leg, and then I was like, okay, my right leg is in a lot of pain. Then I was like, oh, now it's in my left leg, and then sometimes it's in both legs, and so just being, it was very frustrating. I was like, what is happening to me? I'm like, I was only 22 when this was happening, and I was like, I don't understand. And then also had the bad brain fog and all these different things. Again, told this to my doctor, and really, I had to again self advocate for myself and be like, no, something's not right.
There's a real theme to your story, and that theme, you just said it, is self-advocacy.
Mm-hmm.
That advocacy, and I took a note down as being dismissed by even your doctor. And I know, again, I've
Mm-hmm.
talked to so many people with invisible conditions, and being dismissed. I've been dismissed numerous times as well. I live with arthritis. It's like, oh, it's just morning stiffness. I'm like, well, my knee is the size of a
Mm-hmm.
basketball. I don't think that's morning
Mm-hmm.
stiffness. And um, but you kept advocating for yourself. And what was that driver?
I didn't. I haven't always been a self advocate. I think because like I said, I work with kids, teens, and adults with disabilities, and so I was advocating for them. And about into my career, and I was like, I can't do real work if I don't advocate for myself. If I don't take care of myself first. And I think, and again in 2017, I kind of hit that rock bottom because of all the things I dealt with. And I was like, I had to start choosing me completely, and I think that's where it stemmed from. It's like I need to choose me in everything I do. And if I'm not going to advocate for myself, who is? And so it was kind of, it was really a mindset shift, because I was like, I feel like I always used to put others before myself, especially in high school too. And that was also had to do with some nonsense then, but really understanding it's like I don't want to deal with the nonsense anymore. I want to get better. I want to live life to the fullest. I want to enjoy my career. I want to find the love of my life. I want to do all these things. I want to enjoy and wake up with every morning with a smile on my face as much as I possibly can. Obviously, so have good days and bad days, especially with my conditions, but understanding that I want to enjoy the majority of my life and move forward and make a difference. And in order to make a difference, it starts with taking care of myself and advocating for my needs.
So important. I need to choose me, is what you said. I need to choose me. That's sometimes not easy, is it?
No.
And yeah, it's especially, you know, I've met, again, a few people who they love to support others. They are, I wouldn't say necessarily people pleasers, but they just love to help and love to support. And then do you find yourself getting to that point where it's like, time out, I have to make myself a to-do list and work out now?
I think that's why I make that self-care to-do list. I started that last year. I already had a work to-do list. I had my volunteer to-do list. And then one day I was like, I'm not doing self-care as much as I should. I was doing it like once a week, maybe. I was like, oh yeah, maybe today I should work out. Maybe today I should, go for a walk. Something as little as that, but it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. And so it's like, oh, maybe I can trick my brain, knowing how stubborn it is sometimes, to do it if it's on my to-do list. Now I have workout on my to-do list. I have yoga on my to-do list. I even have shower and brush my teeth on my to-do list, because some days it's very hard. But that's me choosing me.
Maybe that's the title of our podcast, is it's me. I choose me.
Mm-hmm.
And so somebody is listening to this and is really struggling. Yeah, it's going to be difficult to say no, but setting those boundaries. I was having a conversation with somebody earlier, the week that we're recording this, about boundaries and how to set boundaries. And they said it takes a lot of willpower. And it does, but it all ties together with advocacy. When you have to advocate for yourself, you have to choose yourself. It's making that choice. And then it's setting boundaries, because it might mean you're saying no to things, or it might mean you're saying yes to things that are on your to-do list and no to things that aren't on your to-do list.
Yes, it's like sometimes I think boundaries is kind of like in the mainstream now. And like everyone's like, oh, it has to have boundaries, 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 boundaries. But I think a lot of people don't really know what boundaries means or what it actually entails. And so just checking in with yourself, it's like, how can I best show up as myself in different situations? What boundaries do I have to put in place for myself, for others in my life or in my career? What boundaries do I have to set in place to be able to not just survive, but thrive?
You have your diagnosis. You've chosen to be in this line of work: accessibility, accommodation, disability inclusion. And so I'm really curious, being in this space, I know you've heard a few silly things, or have heard some, even I'll use the word micro discriminations or discriminations in workplaces, as going in as a facilitator or a consultant. I'm curious, can you share a few of these little stories with us?
Yeah, I think even when I have like a consultation with someone and they're like, "Are you?" I remember one time someone's like, "Are you one of them?" I'm like, "What do you mean one of them? Are you one of them?" And I was like, "Can you elaborate? What are you referring to? Do you have the lived experience of having disability?" And I'm like, "Why'd you phrase it as like one of them?" Oh, there seems to be this disconnect that I'm, it's like, oh, you must, if you're doing this work and you're doing it so well, even though it's like, I have, I'm just trying my best every day, you can't possibly actually have the experiences that you're talking about. And it's like, no, because I have these experiences, I'm like, again, I had a nap before this call. Why are you? Or I'm like, oh, this call is draining me. I'm gonna have a nap right after this, and understanding that it looks different on everyone, and that I think also another silly question sometimes is that, oh, you're too young to be talking about these complex topics. You don't know enough about it, and I know my experience in working with kids and teens and teenagers with these disabilities, also my experience as being a kid and teenager with disability, and just really understanding that sometimes people, it's so funny. Sometimes I know they don't mean any harm sometimes, so they're just like generally asking, and that kind of also makes it more laughable, more funny, and just like, what are you asking me right now? Or sometimes people, because I'm biracial, so my mom is from Guyana and my dad is white, but I'm still a person of color, and sometimes people will be like, well, so like, are you going to talk about disability from a race perspective since you're black, basically? And I'm like, I'm going to talk about it from a human perspective because we're all human. If you want me to take that lens and you want me to add race into it, I can, if that's what you would like and your organization needs that. But I'm just taking it from a human approach and a human lens to inform how to better support humans in the workplace that just happen to have disabilities.
Yeah, I've heard it myself of, oh, are you sure you live with something? Or what makes you that expert to talk on this? And I say,
Mm-hmm.
well, I'm not an expert, I'm an advocate. And I'm very curious
Mm-hmm.
and I'm open to learning. And yes, I live with multiple invisible conditions. Where's your washer? And as soon as I mention washroom, it usually gets people
Mm-hmm.
a little confused and sometimes
Mm-hmm.
intentionally awkward. Because yeah, living with an invisible condition is just that. It's not apparent. And so, if we're having that conversation, the words we use matter so much, don't they? And I've
Mm-hmm.
gone into organizations and talked just about this topic is the words we use have
Mm-hmm.
impact.
Yeah, I think people, it's so interesting. I think people know words have impact, but sometimes people are just so careless with their words. They don't mean to be malicious. And I talk about this, I'm like, even if you don't mean to be malicious, so you don't mean to impact someone negatively, when you're careless with your words, you don't know what impact you're going to have. And I think sometimes too, people, like, why didn't it mean it like that? So why did, Sally interpret it that way? She's just being over dramatic, or, all these things. It's like, when you don't care about the word you're saying towards someone, and especially about someone, that's when real problems can occur.
I was recording with someone on a very sensitive topic, a topic we don't talk a lot about in
Mm-hmm.
society. The topic is suicide. And we talked a lot
Mm-hmm.
about the language. And so that episode is coming out May of 2024, and the language matters. And so when we think of what you just said, it's like, oh, why are you so sensitive? Or why is that person, why did they take it wrong? Well,
Mm-hmm.
maybe they are kind of at their end
Mm-hmm.
of being able to process, well, you don't look sick or you look tired. You should just nap. Why are you always tired all the time? Maybe you should check your iron levels. It's like, well, no, I live with something that's invisible and the conversation is taxing on me and I'm tired. So I'm just going to go and
Mm-hmm.
rest. And, you know, also agree that often the words we use there's often no ill intent. They're not meant to be malicious. However, that's not an excuse in my
Mm-hmm.
world, and I will correct someone now, and because I've heard it all, and I share the story often. Is it was a week before surgery, and somebody said to me, "Are you sure you need
Mm-hmm.
surgery? You look fine." Like I haven't had a real meal in like 4 months. I'm living off of supplement diet drinks and
Mm-hmm.
trying to be healthy enough for surgery, and it's that was a catalyst for invisible condition. That was the moment of like, we got to end this, we got to stop this. And I'm sure you
Mm-hmm.
hear it all the time too, even going into workplaces.
Yeah, I think like, with that, it's like, I think sometimes, like, why does when someone, like, I think, like, I hate, like, the term thin. Be like, why does thin make being healthy? There's so many different ways of being healthy and being unhealthy, and understanding that you never know what someone's struggling with or dealing with. And so just be very careful with your words. And, if someone, I don't understand why people don't take people at face value. It's like, no, I am sick. I'm dealing with something, you know? And I think people sometimes, again, they want to just be helpful and be like, well, you don't look sick. Oh, they think they're being nice when they said this, I was like, oh, you don't look sick. How am I being so nice that I'm saying Tim doesn't look sick? But it's like, it's so invalidating. And, people, again, need to really be careful and be kind with their words.
Yeah, it's choosing your words, taking that pause. I've written pretty extensively on the blog about this, and I'm pretty outspoken on this. And
Mm-hmm.
you've been very successful at advocating for yourself. I'm sure it wasn't always easy, and you didn't stop, and you're not stopping advocating. If somebody's listening to this and saying, I don't even know where to start, I don't know how to continue advocating for myself, whether it's at the doctor's office or in their school or with their friends or family or in the workplace, what would you say to someone?
I think I would say, see, I'm going to pause and choose my words carefully. I know. I think I would say take a moment to reflect on kind of what you want out of life, and look at your current situation and look at, if it's in a relationship with your family or in your career, is it what you want? If it's not with you, what you want, not, you know, if you have it in your power to get it better, you know, and if you just spoke up for yourself, you said, and you put those boundaries in place, if you spoke from a place of, this is what I deserve, this is what I want, I'm dealing with something that's impacting my life in a negative way, you know, start thinking about what you really want and start advocating yourself that way. And especially, I think, as self advocates and as advocates, sometimes people naturally want to advocate for other people, like we mentioned before. And so it's like, if you advocate for other people, why would you not advocate for yourself that way? And that's kind of how I had to look at it for myself too, because I'm like, in order to continue advocating for other people with disabilities, because I think I started off by just advocating for other people with disabilities. I'm like, oh, that's not me, I was like under the guise. But it's like, in order to continue making impact, to continue living life the way you want and living it to the fullest and to advocate for other people, it starts with yourself, because otherwise you're going to get burnt out, you're going to get tired, you're going to get resentful. That's like, why is, I'm advocating for so many other people, but no one's advocating for me. But no one's going to advocate for you unless you start first.
Finding that voice, finding your voice. I've written a bit
Mm-hmm.
about this as well. Is I love what you said is taking a pause and reflecting on what do you want out of life? Where do you want your life to go? What do you need? And that's what's missing now.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's practicing finding your voice. And I create a little
Mm-hmm.
model. It's up on the website. But it really is that reflection of, almost taking some of that emotion out, especially if you're talking to your doctor or talking to your workplaces. This is what I'm dealing with right now. And this is what I need. So how can you support me? What do you need?
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Or even working, sometimes you don't know what you need,
yeah.
but you just know what you're currently getting is what you don't want, what you don't need. And so, like, hey, and having that trust with your family, with your doctor, with your manager, your coworker, having that space and that respect to be like, hey, I need your support. I don't know exactly what that looks like right now, but can you work with me to figure it out?
So important. I'm so glad you brought that up. Often, at least from my perspective, if I'm in the middle of something, if I'm in the middle of a flare or I'm having a bit of a
Mm-hmm.
crisis, a mental crisis, or a bit of a breakdown, I don't know what I need. Um,
Mm-hmm.
Having that support system around you to just even say, I'm living with something or going through something right now, and I don't know what I need, but I just need your support. And
Mm-hmm.
for that person who's on the other end, for them to say, I'm here for you whenever you need it. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
We don't need to fill in the blank. We don't need to say, oh, you're dealing with this. Oh, here's a diet, or here, try
Mm-hmm.
this supplement, or hey, go have a nap. We don't need that. We just need, hey, thank you for trusting me with that. how can I support you?
Mm-hmm.
Simple, and yet so hard.
Yeah, the first time my partner said that to me, I was like, "What just happened?" I was like, "It actually worked. What's happening?" And then I started crying because I was so.
Yeah.
I just like it's hard, but it's like knowing that someone cares about you enough to just be there when you're going through something, um, is everything.
Yeah. When I was going through uh, preparing for surgery, uh, I was at one of the lowest points I've ever been in my life,
Mm-hmm.
from even a physical and mental capacity. And a good friend of mine, he would call me up out of the blue, and I'd look at his number and go, okay, I know who this is. I'm going to pick it up. And all he would say was, "Hey, do you have pants on today?" And it was our little joke. And he would text that to
Mm-hmm.
me. And because he knew if I would answer no, then I probably needed a bit more support. But if I answered yes, I actually went for a walk. He'd be like, okay, just checking in. And that was our little code.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget that. I'm sure if I go back through my texts, I'll have dozens of them from this person.
I love that.
And it's just these little check-ins, to just check in with someone, right? Without solution, just through curiosity. I'm still learning this. My wife lives
Mm-hmm.
with arthritis, and some days she shares that she's really stiff, and my mind automatically goes to solution, and
Mm-hmm.
she corrects me often. And so it's a process. I'm working on it. We're not going to be perfect at this, but even in our workplaces, if you're in HR and somebody's disclosed that they need support, you don't necessarily need to have the answers. Why don't you just say, what do you need?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think it's such an important lesson, and something super important as we navigate this world of accommodation, accessibility, and advocacy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think as long as you're willing to, the HR is willing to try to help the employee, as the manager, you're willing to help that employee. Just, I think the key word is try. As long as you try, you like. I think people are like, oh, I want to try, and I'm wrong. But as long as you try, and someone sees that you generally are trying and trying to be there for them and support them, that you can never be wrong.
Sydney, you're an inspiration to me, and I know you're an inspiration to so many. Uh, you have lived through a lot. You have a lot of life to live, and you are just that fierce advocate going into workplaces. You're speaking publicly about this topic, and that's so inspiring. And as we look to wrap up, how are we going to end this stigma? And I know it's a broad
Mm-hmm.
question. Sometimes it's an easy question. I'm just curious from your perspective, how are we going to end the stigma of invisible conditions?
Yeah, I think through conversation. So you're doing a great step by having this podcast. I think really conversation and people being willing to listen to the conversations and actually have these conversations and being willing to just try.
You said having people listen to the conversation, and in your line of work, how do you get people to listen aside from like, hey, here's Sydney's coming into the workplace, you
Mhm.
need to come and listen to what you have to say? But how do you get people to listen?
I think kind of again meeting people where they're at. So like I do a session about supporting neurodiversity in the workplace. It's one of my most popular ones, and gauging the audience and being like, okay, how do they feel about the topic? How do they be receptive to it? Because sometimes I can have the same thing on the slides, but it can go in a completely different direction based on how the audience is interacting and how they're perceiving it, and that is a skill in itself. But just being able to kind of read the people you're talking to and see where they're at and meet them where they're at and be willing to educate them and take more time if needed. And just if you're willing to take that time, then they'll be like, oh, that see that you're willing to take that time and be receptive to that. That they're going to take a little bit more time, whether they need to talk about various thing in specific. I think just meeting people where they're at and leveraging that is a huge way to get them to listen.
I think that's a great place to end or wind down our conversation. It's stepping into our normal, as you had said, my normal,
Mm.
sharing your story and meeting people where they're at. Some people don't want to hear it.
Mm.
But what I found is most people are curious. Oh, tell me more about that.
Mhm.
That is such an important message to end on. So if you're listening to this and you live with something that's invisible, it's not apparent, and you want to step into your story, reach out to myself, reach out to Sydney. We'd love to have that conversation and help you embrace your story. And if somebody's looking to get a hold of you and wants to connect with you, where can they find you?
You can connect with me on LinkedIn at Sydney Elaine Butler.
Perfect. And I'll have that in the show notes as well. Your contact information. I know you've got your website. We'll put that up there in the show notes. So again, thanks for joining me today. And if you are listening and if you have a story to tell, reach out, shoot me a note through the website. Head to invisiblecondition.com through the contact page there. And also, if you have the means, I would love it if you're able to donate. So if you're listening to this and want to keep this show going, every dollar that we bring in goes into helping the production of Invisible Condition, as well as forward this on to your friends, your family, your coworkers, everybody you can. Subscribe to the newsletter, all that good stuff. And so again, Sydney, thanks for joining me today. And for those who are listening, I hope you have a good one.